Few deaths have ever affected me the way that John Jones' death in 2009 has. The story of a man with seemingly everything going for him cut short because of one wrong turn. And make sure you guys stick around to the end as I show you some of the most ridiculous things that people have done to try to capitalize on this tragic story. Nutty Putty Cave was a popular cave in Utah that would have adventure seekers coming in droves to test their mettle in the winding, tight caves passageways. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I can't see the allure of going 1,355 feet or 413 meters underground just for the pleasure of it, but I guess that's what separates us as individuals. What may seem scary to some seems like a thrill to others. It's part of the human experience, and adventure has been ingrained in the culture far before any cameras were ever a thing. The story of John Jones has been retold many times, even being made into a motion picture called The Last Descent, but rarely has anyone ever tried to dive into what was going on with John mentally during his last few hours alive in Earth. I say in Earth because John didn't die on Earth, he died inside of it, in a tomb unlike any other. The cave. Nutty Putty Cave has an interesting history. Discovered in 1960, it gained popularity among cavers for its narrow passages and intricate maze-like structure. The cave features a variety of formations, including stalactites and stalagmites and halactites and balactites, and has been a site of several notable cave expeditions. Dale Green and his friends discovered the cave in 1960 and named it after the soft brown clay found in its passages, which felt like putty. Remember that, because that's going to come into play later. He originally considered the name Silly Putty, but decided Nutty Putty sounded better. The cave itself would attract 5,000 visitors per year, including Boy Scouts. Yeah, not exactly a place where I'd want my kids going. However, John Jones was not the first person, though, who needed rescuing from Nutty Putty Cave. There were 4 different times rescues were needed to be called in to save the life of someone who found themselves trapped inside the putty-like death trap, including some Boy Scouts. Like I said, not a place I'd ever want my kids going. From 1999 to 2004, 6 different people became stuck in one of Nutty Putty's narrow passages. I mean, it's not for nothing that 3 of the cave's tightest squeezes are called the Helmet Eater, the Scout Eater, and the Birth Canal. Really, the Scout Eater, though, and you're bringing Boy Scouts there? All 6 of those trapped cavers made it out of Nutty Putty alive, but the Utah County Sheriff's Office and search and rescue crews grew tired of making regular trips out to pull tourists from the cave. And then they worried that the next accident would be fatal. And unfortunately, they were right. In 2006, an effort was put forth to study and severely limit the number of visitors allowed inside the cave, but eventually the cave was reopened to the public, and that decision would change everything for one particular family, the man himself. John Edward Jones was no stranger to cave exploring. As a child, his father would take him and his brother caving as a form of family bonding. And by all accounts, John seemed to really love it. Unfortunately, though, John was not familiar with Nutty Putty Cave, as this was his first trip to the cave and undoubtedly was also his last. John and a caving party entered the cave around 8 p.m. on November 24th, 2009. The darkness didn't really matter, as the cave itself was only visible with a headlamp that John was known for wearing and was colored in rainbow, and you can actually see it in this picture right here. Now, if I were to try to put myself in John's shoes, I'd imagine he was more excited than anything to go into the cave. He hasn't gone caving in a long time, and finally get a chance to do it again with his brother. He grew up doing it with his dad. And the idea of losing his life was the last thing on his mind, because, as I said before, John had been caving before, so he kind of had an idea of what to expect. The only thing new to him was the cave itself, not the feeling of going below Earth. Plus, at this time, John had everything going for him. He married the girl of his dreams, and even though she rejected his first marriage proposal, she eventually committed herself to him in the end. John was also on his way to becoming a doctor and a dad.
It's the curse of being in medical school.
John was literally thriving in every way a man could want. So again, when you're on that much of a roll in life, tragedy is like the last thing you see coming. Now let's get into the incident itself. As I said before, John entered the cave at 8 p.m. on November 24th. With him was his brother and a few other friends that were taking the leap alongside him, or the dive, if you will. I'm sure the strength in numbers helped ease his mind, knowing that if anything were to go wrong, there would be people there to try to help him, which could also be why he was so brave feeling. Little did John know, though, just how much help he was going to actually need, and then some. Even though John was experienced in caving, he hadn't set foot in a cave for a couple of years, so I guess you could say he was rusty. John wasn't the small kid he once was, and he wasn't caving with his dad anymore. John was 6 foot tall, 200 pounds. He was a grown-ass man, embarking into a cave known for its tight passageways. I wonder if John was aware just how tight the cave was, or if he was just more excited to capture those nostalgic feelings again of being underground with his brother. The first hour in the cave went as expected, but at some point, John decided along with his brother that they wanted to search out a part of the cave known as the birth canal. This was a popular section of the cave where cavers would inch their way through narrow passageways. People called it the birth canal due to it reminding cavegoers of being born. John inched his way through the cave on his belly, shimmying his elbows and hips to continue his way forward until John reached what he believed to be the entrance to the birth canal. Crawling headfirst on his belly, John made his way forward into the birth canal. I'm not really sure where his brother was at this point, but I'd imagine he wasn't too far behind. As John moved forward, he realized that this was not the birth canal, but also he had no way to turn around where he was, so he had to continue forward. And this one single decision would be the catalyst that would change his life. One wrong turn, that's all it took. John saw an opening no bigger than a door to a dryer that looked like it might lead to another part of the cave. So he went headfirst down, looking to continue his crawl and hoping to find an opening. However, when John reached the bottom of this opening, I could only imagine the panic that started to set in when he realized there was no opening. On top of that, John was now stuck. John tried to exhale the air from his lungs in order to try and get himself loose, which is a technique lots of cavers use to squeeze through small areas, especially at 6 foot, 200 pounds. However, it only ended up making John more stuck. The panic at this point had to be setting in for John, trapped underground 1,000 feet with his arms pinned to his chest, and worse off, he was completely upside down. But John was a determined guy. He wasn't about to just give up, so he started yelling for help.
Josh. Josh!
And luckily for John, his brother Josh happened to be close by and heard his cries for help.
John? Yeah, John.
When John's brother Josh arrived on the scene, he could only see John's feet sticking up from the ground.
His two feet kind of eaten up by that little crevice. You know, I couldn't see his body.
Again, I could only imagine what John's brother Josh thought seeing the predicament that his brother found himself in. John's brother did what he could to try to free John, but given how tight the pathway was and how big John was, it was nearly impossible task to get him free, with especially one guy. So, being men of the Mormon faith, they decided to begin praying instead. Now, I'm not exactly sure what they prayed for, but I'd imagine it was something along the lines of, "Please God, get me the heck out of here." But reports say the prayer was a request for help to help get them through this. Now, this is where the rescue comes in. John's brother knew there was little he could do for his brother on his own. His brother needed him, and fast. John was stuck 100 feet down. His brother Josh had shimmied his way all the way back up to the cave and out. Even if John's brother Josh made record time getting to the rescuers, getting the equipment down there where John was stuck would take time. The more John tried to help himself, the worse he made his situation. I can only imagine the minute that John realized he was truly helpless. The amount of panic that set in had to be immeasurable. What thoughts would go through your head in a situation like that? I'm sure the most overwhelming thought I'd have if I were John would be, why did I even come down here? When John's first rescuer, Susie Matola, showed up, Susie was a petite young lady. John's only response was, "Hello, Susie. Thanks for coming, but I'd really like to get out." I'm sure the sound of the rescuer's voice arriving offered John some sort of comfort, but I'm sure for John, until he was out of that hole, there was little else to do but hope. The rescuers began rigging up a series of pulleys and ropes that she had tied to her leg when she entered the Nutty Putty Cave. Since the pathway was so narrow, she couldn't actually hold them, which is why she had to tie them to her feet. Now, this is a petite young lady, so you can imagine how tight those pathways actually are. These ropes and pulleys would be rigged up throughout the cave in hopes they could lift John up and out of the crevice he had found himself in. At this point, the media began to gather outside of the entrance to the cave. As news of John's predicament started to make its rounds in the community, I'd imagine the presence of the media put added pressure on the rescue team as well.
He freed at some point in time today?
Freed is a relative term, Sean.
As if saving John already wasn't hard enough. They had the whole state watching them now. It took Susie 20 minutes of crawling just to reach John, which should give you some insight into just how far down he was and how many pulleys they'd actually need to get him up. John's predicament was really bad, mainly because of the position he found himself in, and that was upside down. The only part of John Susie could even see was his navy blue sneakers sticking out of the rock, almost like he was being swallowed up by the earth. Even though Susie was a petite 5'3" slender girl, even she found the movement in the cave to be tight. She couldn't extend her arms and legs, but she knew she had a job to do, and that job was to save John. It was now 12:30 a.m., and John had been stuck in this position for over 3 hours. One arm bent underneath his chest and the other forced backward. John could use his calves, but given the position that he was in, he couldn't do much. Okay, no worries, John. You're going to be out of here. Lickety split.
Rescue crews are here. I'm Susie, by the way. We're gonna get you out of here, lickety split.
And remember, this wasn't Susie's first rescue. She had saved people from the cave before, and I feel like she had full confidence in her and her team's ability to free John. As she began to tie a lover's knot around John's feet, it began to dawn on her that his situation wasn't going to be an easy one. When John had entered the fissure, there was a lip of rock that went upwards. And now this little lip of rock is all the cause of the problems. John, believing the fissure would allow him to have enough space to turn around, entered that fissure head first, which is how he ended up stuck upside down. This lip made pulling John out with a rope a real big problem. In order to pull John out, they would need to hyperextend his legs, meaning bending them in a way that they were just not meant to go. Each moment John was stuck upside down made his situation more dire. The human body was never designed to be upside down for long periods of time. An inverted body can't properly pump blood to the heart the way it's intended to. So John would have had to notice loss of feeling in his feet and legs first, while also enduring massive pressure on his head from blood continuously rushing to his skull. Anybody who's been upside down for long periods of time knows what that pressure feels like. So not only was John stuck, but he was also now in an immense amount of pain. The rescue team was doing their best to monitor John's vitals while giving him Gatorade and running an IV to him to try to buy him more time, but every second counted. The medical team on the site gave John around 10 hours to live if he was not freed, and freed fast. At this time, Susie was doing whatever she could to try to help John, including helping him reposition himself in whatever way she could. But John, being 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, and Susie only being 5'3", didn't really give her much options in regards to pulling him out herself. She had to resort to pouring water down John's arms and hoping that just some of it would find his mouth. She cut off his jeans, trying to free up whatever room she could. Every centimeter counted here. She would talk to John about their religion, even singing to him, just to try to ease the intensity of the situation. Even at one point, John giving Susie a pep talk about why she should stay committed to her faith in God. John was a very impressive young man, and for the majority of the time was attempting his best to remain in good spirits about his whole situation, which, let's be honest, impossible to do for most of us. I mean, seriously, imagine yourself in that situation and trying to remain positive. I can't imagine the type of character that John really was to do that. Just a typical goofball who was incredibly smart and intelligent and persistent. Susie noticed that as John spoke, his voice became more and more nasally and his breathing began to labor due to the position that John was in. His blood wasn't pumping the way it should. Eventually, Susie was called up to the surface for a well-earned break and was replaced by another rescuer. Unfortunately, there was no break for John though. The process was to get John out, and it was taking a very long time. And time was one thing that John didn't have. Some ideas to get John out involved olive oil, drills, and even explosives, if you could believe it. But each idea would create too much risk of hurting or even accidentally killing John. So the pulley system was all they had. Without the pulleys, there was just too much friction on the rope to be able to pull John out. You see, the windingness of the cave wouldn't really allow for the rope to be able to be pulled by, it doesn't matter how many men, the rope would just snap before it ever pulled John up. So what they had to do was install pulleys so that they were alleviating that pressure between each curve of the passageway. Without the pulleys, there was just too much friction on the rope to be able to pull John out. John reportedly would go through moments of panic where he would begin thrashing about in the fissure. I can't imagine what John was feeling in these moments of panic. Thrashing about in any way you can to free yourself, but the rocks just refusing to let you go. John was provided with a walkie-talkie to communicate with the surface. Finally, the time came for the rescuers to try and pull John out using the pulley system that they had spent hours and hours setting up. The pulleys began to slowly lift John out of the small sliver of earth that had imprisoned him. Slow and steady, John was beginning to move. But then... the worst case scenario happened. The pulley had failed. Unfortunately, due to the putty-like material that the cave was made of, the pulleys couldn't lock into the cave the way that they were designed to. Remember when I said earlier to remember the putty-like feels on the side of the cave? Well, that is why. The pulleys just couldn't grab the tension from the sides of the rocks that they needed to be able to lift John's big body out. And you have to remember, he was so far down. Even worse than that, all the progress made towards getting John out was for nothing. John had fallen back into the stone prison, and this time he was in an even worse predicament than he was before.
It is a relative term, Sean. He was pulled back a little bit to a more comfortable position where he was in more of a horizontal position, but there was still 16 feet of that tight tunnel he was stuck in for him to get out of before he would be truly freed and be able to leave the cave. Now, a piece of equipment broke at that time. He has since slid back into that original position with his head down at a 60 or 70 degree angle, so a very uncomfortable spot, and rescuers very worried tonight. The sun came and went Wednesday, and the Utah County Search and Rescue Team still surrounded the mouth of Nutty Putty Cave. Inside, 26-year-old John Jones had been stuck since 9 o'clock Tuesday night.
Being stuck in that position for going on 23 hours now makes it very difficult for him.
Only a single rescuer can get in the space called Bob's Push, an area only 18 inches wide and maybe 10 inches high. Jones' brother saw him enter the passage while they explored.
He'd worked himself face forward through a series of tight passes, and he'd gotten himself to a point where he couldn't back up.
It's now been about 22 hours since John Jones became stuck in that hole inside the cave. Just recently, they've been trying to figure out a way to have him communicate with his family by radio.
Want to have the family have a chance to talk to him, sort of boost his spirits a bit.
Rescuers say Jones is exhausted. They were able to pull him to a more comfortable position for a short period of time and even provided him with food and water. But then equipment failed, and they were back to where they started.
Still far from being a recovery. It's a rescue. But the longer it goes, obviously, the more concern there is.
And tonight they are using every tool available to them, including some pneumatic tools, some air-driven tools, to try to make that hole larger, get perhaps an extra rescuer in there closer to him, maybe get a rope on him and get him back out of that tunnel, at least to a more comfortable position. What they're really worried about, though, as he gets more tired, he's in that awful position down there, he will be unable to help them with his own rescue, and that's something they really need right from him right now. They need him to put some effort into it and maybe get himself out, but he is exhausted is what they're telling us. Back to you, Mark and Sean.
Now Fields, earlier today, we all thought he'd be out by now. Are they worried? Are they starting to get a little bit worried about all this?
They're very worried about him.
Before the pulleys broke, John had an opportunity to speak to his wife in an attempt to motivate John to hang on for a little bit longer and not to give up. Unfortunately for John, this story does not have a happy ending. After the pulleys had broke, John became unresponsive. As the medical team checked his vitals, John no longer had a pulse. And unfortunately was determined to be deceased. Without John assisting rescuers to try to lift himself out, it was basically impossible to get him out of that cave. John died on November 24th, 2009, and even though the rescuers did everything they could, the position that John was in made it a race against time, and unfortunately, that time ran out. Eventually, the decision was made to seal the entrance to Nutty Putty Cave with John inside, and a memorial to John was created. My hope is that John, towards the end of this, didn't have the wherewithal consciously to know hope was lost. This would become his grave. In a YouTube video by CBG, a YouTube channel who documented their journey through the cave in 2005, they show you the entrance to what is the birth canal, and along the way, they actually show you the entrance that John took that inevitably led to his death.
And let's give these people an idea of what's going on in here.
Show them the hole up there once you get light up in there.
Well,
Can you see it very good?
The flashlight would be better for shining up in the hole. What's behind you, Carson?
More tunnel?
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me, but the way that they say more tunnel, as though they know that it's not a place that they want to go, tells you the difference between someone who knows the cave and someone who may be traveling the cave for the first time. A lot of people have been very critical of John in saying that he was irresponsible for going down there without properly knowing the cave. But personally, I think that anybody going to a cave the first time is very susceptible of making this mistake. And many of us probably wouldn't know what we would do in that situation until we're in it. Then again, I feel like most of us would probably never find ourselves in this situation in the first place, because the idea of going this far underground scares the living crap out of me. And considering that John paid for his mistake with his life in one of the most horrific ways imaginable, I think it's safe to say that no matter what criticism you hurl at the family to try and blame John, there's nothing you can say that would be worse than what he already had to go through and what the family had to go through. I've also come across some really strange videos regarding John Jones, particularly in this one. It's a paranormal team that decided that they were going to go to the entrance of Nutty Putty Cave and host a spirit box session, which I gotta be honest, I feel like this is super disrespectful, considering that everybody who knew him is basically still alive, and this only happened less than 20 years ago.
John Edward Jones unfortunately got stuck in a small crevice inside this cave about 150 feet in roughly. Rescuers, a lot of people tried to get him out, and it was about like a 3-day ordeal, I think. They could not get him out. Unfortunately, he just died of asphyxiation, got stuck in there. And so what they did is they sealed this cave off, at least in this spot, and I think they sealed it off at one other entranceway. But this was the main entrance, and this is kind of his memorial site. And we're going to try and do a daytime spirit session. I don't know what HMMS stands for. Memorial site. Hello, spirits. Is John Edward Jones here with us at the entrance of this cave?
God, I really hope not. Could you imagine having to die in such a horrific way only to have your spirit trapped at this stupid fucking cave for the rest of eternity after devoting your life to Mormonism?
Sound like a yep. How are you doing, John? John, what happened to you in this cave? John, are you here with us? Do you want to communicate with us for a moment? Said leave. It's a female voice.
I don't blame you, John. If you are there, I wouldn't want to talk to those fat fucks either. Like, do these two morons realize that there's kids of his that are still alive that are going to have to grow up watching your idiotic ass go to where their dad died a horrific death, trying to communicate with him with a stupid FM radio that just scrolls through channel and hasn't been scientifically proven to be accurate whatsoever? Oh man, I'll tell you, the internet. It's one thing to talk about this story and how tragic it is. It's another thing to completely go there and do this dumb shit. And the only reason I'm even including this part is because I wanted to show you just how stupid some people on the internet are regarding this story. John's wife went on to remarry, and both of his kids seem to be doing pretty well. I gotta say though, it's gotta be odd to know that your dad died in what some consider to be the worst death in internet history.
In the realm of of endless fight, where truth and justice ignite. He marches on courageous and bold, e.g. lately a hero story told.